Good evening and welcome to the Borders on Project. Today we discuss a recently published document that was prepared by the Republican Study Committee in the United States, National Security Strategy. It's a very interesting document and we discuss it already in our regional countries for several days. And my special guest today is Brigadier General and Congressman Dona Bäkon. Congressman Bäkon, welcome to the Border Zone.
Thank you very much, Егor, for having me. I look forward to this interview. And I look forward to talking to your viewers.
Thanks a lot. First of all, could you please tell me how are you there in this difficult COVID-19 pandemic period?
Well, Nebraska wasn't hit as hard as, say, like New York, but we had some pockets in Nebraska that had COVID. For example, our meatpacking plants had a high infection rate. Some of our retirement centers for senior citizens were hit, but by and large, Nebraska had it better than the rest of the country. But like everywhere in the world, we had some impact.
Very good. That it's better now already. First of all, could you please tell me, I read this document, this national security strategy that you also signed, and I'm interested, like the language and the spirit of this document reminded me about messages of, I don't know, Cold War. So do you personally believe that Russian government or Russian activities is one of the major threats to United States and international security, maybe?
I do, but it's not just Russia. We have concerns with a growing China and a growing...
We'll get back to China in several minutes.
Yeah, but this point is, this document's, yes, Russia is a threat, but it's not just Russia. It's acknowledging we have a handful of threats, and free nations have to band together to defend freedom and our principles. But yes, Russia is a threat. It only has 10% of our GDP, but yet they have a larger nuclear weapon inventory. They're modernizing their nuclear weapons. They're a threat to Georgia. They're a threat to their other neighbors like the Baltic states. They're run by an FSB, KGB type leadership at the top that seeks to undermine democracies and they don't share our values. So I don't think Putin nor the others around him are trustworthy, and I think that they are there to undermine our role in the world and our alliances with free nations. So yes, I see Russia as a threat.
Sponsor of terrorism was mentioned in this document. Is that a proper definition? And why it appeared now, after 6 years from the war in Ukraine, from the beginning of the war in Ukraine, after 12 years of occupation of Georgia, why now in 2020 we're getting back to sponsors of terrorism?
Well, I've always felt this way. I think our government should have been more clear right at the beginning when it came to the aggression against Georgia, the aggression in Crimea. We can't ignore the fact that what Russia did in Georgia, what Russia's done in Ukraine, and we should have been more clear, over the last 10 years that this is wrong. And so I think what we're doing is I believe in speaking the truth. And I think what Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s when he called the Soviet Union an evil empire, a lot of people laughed at that, right? However, the folks inside the Soviet Union that were dissidents said, you know what, someone's speaking the truth. And I think we have to speak the truth. Russia has a nefarious objectives. They do not share our values, and they seek to undermine us, and not just us, other free nations. And I think they're a threat to freedom and liberties and the things that we hold dear. So if we haven't been clear enough in the previous 5 to 10 years, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be clear now. So I'm glad we're speaking with clarity, and I think that's important.
There is a paragraph in regard with your proposal, like committee proposal, in regard with increasing of the level of sanctions. Do you believe that the current package of sanctions is not efficient and some additional measures are needed?
Well, I wasn't the only person who wrote this. There was a large group of us. I would say, yes, I support but increased sanctions, but I speak that in principle. I'd have to study specifically any individual recommendation or policy perspective, because there's always a cause and effect. But in principle, I agree that we should be more pointed towards Russia and Putin for what they're doing. And I would include sanctions as part of that. But yes, this document does support that, and I put my name on it.
In this document, for example, I think you know about it, few names are called of so-called, as it is stated in the document, Putin's close allies. And the first name is Mr. Medvedchuk, who is Ukrainian politician, and as it said, like a relative of Vladimir Putin, or godfather. Putin is a godfather of his daughter. So if you know about Mr. Medvedchuk, could you please tell me why, from your perspective, for many years after war in Ukraine, after annexation of Crimea, this person who is well known all over the world as Putin's crony in Ukraine was not in the list of sanctions?
I am not sure why not, frankly. I just believe in saying this is what we should be doing from here on out. Let's right wrongs. But I agree with you. Sometimes, in democracies, Igor, there's not continuity from one leader to the next leader. Sometimes we make changes based on who's the majority. So you don't always get the continuity that we would like. But that's just the reality of being in a democracy where you get different majorities at different times. What I think is more important is that we're saying this is what we think we should do now, going forward, and let's make our policy better. Let's make our policy more accurate, and that's what's important in this document. And we represent the largest group of Republicans, in the Congress. So we're putting our voice out there that we should take a harder line towards Russia, but on what they're doing.
Could you please tell me, to finalize this topic, whether you agree that Putin's cronies in other countries, post-Soviet countries, that are distributing his influence or malign influence should be also put in the sanctions list?
I would surely consider it, and I would say offhand I favor it. Again, I like to study individual cases and sanctions so that you get the effect. Yes, in principle, I support it. We need to be clear that Putin is not our friend, and we should highlight those who are serving his interests that undermine our interests. And when I say our interests, the interests of freedom, the interest of democracy, equality under the law, rule of law. And I would say Putin is on the other side of those issues. So to me, this is about moral clarity. We support values that are human rights values, and Putin's on the other side of that. And he has allies that are in other countries that are serving his interests, and we want to highlight that. We shouldn't turn a blind eye towards bad actors, bottom line.
The second very interesting topic, because I'm in Georgia actually, is that in this document, together with Mr. Medvedchuk, was Georgian oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, if you know that name, who is also called close ally of Vladimir Putin, and it's proposed to make sanction him as well. So what I'm interested in here, do you know, or could you please describe how this proposal, how this document was prepared? Because we don't have any evidences of Bidzina Ivanishvili being close ally. We saw some steps, but no evidences. Mm-hmm. Did you see some, or maybe the process of developing the document?
I didn't write this portion, and we brought in technical experts that helped craft it. I would say I am more at the strategic level in this document. Yeah. We want a close relationship with Georgia. Georgia is our friend. The people of Georgia are our friend. By the way, I feel the same way about Ukraine. The people of Ukraine, we want them to be part of the Western team. We want a team of Western values and countries that stand with us, and we stand with them. That's Georgia and Ukraine. But we also know that Putin and the Russian very top of government, I don't want to blame all Russians, but the Putin and his team, they have allies in these different countries that seek to undermine what the values we believe in.
Sure. Could you please tell me, this document, will it be somehow considered for, I don't know, legislation, or it's a position of Republican congressmen? What is it in this more formal way, to understand it?
So there's 201 Republicans in Congress right now. This
Sorry,
is
200?
201 out of 435. So we're a minority by 17 seats. in there. But this is the largest block of Republicans. You know, we have different caucuses, and I affiliate with different caucuses on different areas. But when it comes to foreign policy and national security, I affiliate myself with the RSC, we call it, the Republican Study Caucus, and because their values are my values when it comes to foreign affairs and national security. So, but we're probably a third, maybe 2/5 of the Republican conference as a whole. So we're a large voice, but we're not the only voice. There are some that will disagree with this, but our goal is to advocate for these principles, and I'm going to at a more broad level, strategic level, and hopefully we can get as much of that as we can in the national defense bills that we do, our foreign policy, our trade policy, and things like that. So will this become one for one American policy? No, but portions of it will be. And our goal is to advocate for what we can. And of course, our system of government, like Georgia's, there's compromise. And so some of it will become policy, but not all of it, bottom line.
Sure. Could you please tell me, like in Russia and in Georgia and in some other countries, right after this document appeared, it was said that the lobbyists in the United States initiated this document and made US congressmen develop it and sign it. Could you please tell me whether lobbyists in the United States have a power to make 13 Republican congressmen sign any document?
No, I never talked to a single lobbyist about this document. This is a group of, and I got to go back and double check, I think approximately 70 Republicans somewhere in there, but I got to double check the number. I can't recall. This is all working together, and we share the values. I mean, I'll just start very clear. I believe in our country, and I believe in what our values of freedom, human dignity, rule of law. And I believe in working with other countries that share those values. And we have to be clear, Russia and China, Iran, North Korea, they do not share those values. And they seek to undermine them. And I think free countries have to work together to counter. So this is my worldview. And I would say it's largely the worldview of these Republicans who signed this document. There wasn't a single lobbyist that asked me to sign this. I worked primarily with a congressman called Mike Johnson from Louisiana. And I've been working with Brian Babin. He's an Air Force veteran like me. And I've been working with a lot of different people that put my input into this document, and not a single lobbyist.
Thanks. What is your, considering that you are Brigadier General, what is your understanding of a right way of relations between United States and Russia at the moment when all like international laws are being violated? What will you suggest maybe to your government, your officials? What is the right way?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure that our military is second to none, frankly. And so we've turned our military around over the last 3 years, but we have to ensure that we have the best aircraft, the best ships, the best ground equipment, because that serves as a deterrent. And then I think we need to have close relationship with our allies, to include Georgia as well, but particularly our NATO allies. We have to make sure that we have a presence in the Baltic states and Poland so that there is no temptation for Russia to invade their sovereignty. But I think that's Russia. Then we also have China that's nearing our GDP. So we have to have allies there, Japan, for example, Australia, and I just build that alliance system. And then we have our issues in the Middle East. America cannot do it all. We cannot do it all alone. The free world cannot do without America, but America can't do it by itself. So I believe that we have to have friendships, that we seek military and national security cooperation, but also trade cooperation. And I see a free world working together to advocate for our values that Russia and China, Iran, North Korea seek to undermine. I don't want war. I want peace. But strong countries and strong alliances create the deterrence that we need for peace.
Understood. Could you please tell me, do you know, I want to use this opportunity, do you know any details about situation in Georgia in regard with a borderization, what means a crippling annexation of Georgian territories? by Russian FSB KGB forces, kidnappings, killings every year, actually. Did you hear about these facts in America?
Well, what I've heard is the invasion of your territory and undermining you. I have not heard about the kidnappings. I've not heard of, but it doesn't surprise me. You know,
more than 100 every year. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's terrible. Well, when I was in Estonia, I learned of how the Russians crossed into Estonia's border and kidnapped an Estonian intelligence officer, right? So it doesn't surprise me that they're doing the same thing to Georgia. They try to intimidate, and they try to use their power to, I would say, extort or compel Georgia to try to follow their wishes. And I would say the Georgian government, the Georgian people have been brave, and I think are to be admired for how you've stood up. I think if I was in charge, I would be seeking additional ways to stand closer to Georgia so that you would know that you have a good friend called the United States.
It would be very good day. Understood. And do you know, I think you know that in Russia, they always say, actually every month, that problem of Georgia, problem of Ukraine, all these wars, all these occupations are because of US will to influence in this region and fight Russia. Will you agree with this statement that Russia is occupying Georgia and Ukraine because of the United States?
Okay, I would agree that they are occupying portions of Georgia and Ukraine. I totally disagree because it's the United States. Actually, you know, Russia is thought that these countries that used to be part of their Soviet Union sphere, that they do not have a right to their own sovereignty, to determine their own foreign affairs policy, their own system of economics. They want to control and dictate what the Georgians are doing or the Ukrainians are doing. And I think that America has to be absolutely clear that is wrong. The people of Georgia are their own nation. They should have self-determination. And if they want to be friends with America, thank God that they want to be. But if they don't, that is your right. And we want free people to determine what they want for their country. Foreign policy, their military, their economic policies, everything. It's your right to self-determination. America wants to stand by that, and as well as in Ukraine. And so, but Russia doesn't believe in that. They don't think that Georgia has a right for self-determination, or Ukraine. They think they should be under the shadow of the Russians, that they should be able to dominate and dictate, just like they did in 1950, you know, after the World War II, or 1935, right? They felt like they had control, and they want that control back. Putin said it was the worst day in their history when the Berlin Wall fell and all these countries got their freedom. Well, we support self-determination for nations. And I think that's the right side to be on. So yes, Russia is undermining your sovereignty, Ukraine's sovereignty, but not because of America. It's because of the foreign policy of Putin.
Could you please tell me why, according to your understanding, sanctions in regard with occupation of Georgia was never on the surface, was never in the discussions? And even now in your document, I mean, the document that you signed, this national security strategy, there are some sanctions for people who, I don't know, destabilize democracy, but not, for example, against Russian government for occupation of Georgia. Why?
Well, I'd be willing to reconsider that. This document, I'll be the first to say it's not 100%. It was our way to shoot out there and get us the right direction. I would be willing to reconsider and include that. But I would say that we should have been more steadfast with Georgia all the way through. Because if you're not steadfast with Georgia on day one, then you get Crimea, then you get the Donetsk and central Ukraine. If we're not clear there, then you're going to have the Baltics and Poland. I think we have learned that if we don't stand on the side of right from day one, that it's perceived as weakness, and it will be exploited by the Russians. And so, again, I would say that we may not have been right, or as right as we should have been with Georgia and make it clear that was wrong, what Russians did. We could have done more. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do that now. And so I don't think we should forget. I think what the Russians hope is a decade goes by, 2 decades, and it becomes the new reality. The new borders become written in stone. I don't think we should let that happen. And that's why I disagreed with some who said we should show Crimea as part of Russia. That's wrong. That was taken by force. And by the way, the Russians had an agreement that they would respect the Ukrainian borders if Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons. And then they violated that because the Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons. Then the Russians violated that agreement. And so we can't pretend that this did not happen and forget it.
Maybe the last question, it's very interesting. Could you please tell me, you mentioned NATO allies of the United States and of course versus European Union, but Georgia and Ukraine are seeking the NATO membership for years already, and Georgia for many years actually. But of course, unfortunately, we don't get it because of the occupation, because of huge 140 million Russia close to Georgia. And I understand that United States or European Union, they don't want to implement the Article 5 of the NATO collective security and start war against Russia because of Georgia. But what I want to ask is that Russia never attacked any NATO country. According to your understanding, NATO membership for Georgia will ensure, just today, will ensure 100% security guarantee, or it will provoke Russia to go against NATO?
I think you ask a very good question. And I was like, during my time in the Air Force, I was in NATO and we had these debates. And you're right. I think you stated the concerns from some countries that if we include Georgia as part of NATO, then you would compel perhaps France or Belgium, whoever, to have to go to war against Russia if there was an attack on Georgia, and that was a concern. I have always been amenable and willing to go down this path of including Georgia in NATO. For one, the values of Georgia and the people, they want freedom and they respect the human dignity and the rule of law, the things that we value. And it's a smaller country. I think a smaller country on the border of Russia needs friends like NATO for its security. I don't think we don't want to invite weakness, or we don't want weakness to invite Russian aggression. And so I lean on the side of wanting to include Ukraine and Crimea, or excuse me, Georgia into the NATO thing. So that would be where I favor. Now, granted, there's a bunch of countries that have to agree to this, but I would want to advocate for that. And you're right, Russia will raise holy hell if Georgia is in there, but I doubt they will go to war in the end. But in the end, we have to have it for it to really matter for NATO. You would have to have NATO presence in Georgia, because that is what makes deterrence real. You can't just say Georgia's part of NATO, but not have presence there. There's got to be a U.S. flag on a unit, like an air defense unit or something, to make it real to Russia. And so, but I welcome those discussions because I like being aligned with the values of your country.
I'm advocating now during this discussion, asking you to maybe discuss it further in the United States, not only like NATO status for Georgia membership, but the sanctions list, because the occupation and current borderization kidnappings, they have no reply in reality.
Right. Well, I appreciate you raising that up. I learned something on this interview about the kidnappings and the incursions. I knew there was territory taken, threats. So I appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
I appreciate you following up. Maybe the last question about China. Could you please tell me, like, which specific activities of China towards the United States are considered now as such a big threat as it is mentioned in this document or just in messages?
Well, it's really a look at 10 years, 20 and 30 years from now. Their GDP is about 85% of our GDP, and it's growing with 1.4 billion people. What we see primarily right now is their cyber activity. They are using cyber to undermine our intellectual data on technology, our military secrets out there. They're developing military capacity that is greatly to increase the threat to the American people, whether it's hypersonic weapons, the more subs. They're developing weapons that are in advanced of ours in the hypersonic arena. I'll just say it that way. And there's other areas too. So they're developing capabilities that are right now beyond where we're at, and they threaten the American people. What we see is that they will increasingly threaten their neighbors on that first island chain. And there are our allies who also share our values, much like you and I. You know, whether it's Japan or Indonesia, Philippines, which we have there's some ambiguity there on the values of the current leader. Got that, but they are trying to throw their weight around China in that first island chain. We just saw recently where they were extorting Australia with economic threats, and Australia is a very close friend of ours. So we have to just realize that's the orientation of China. They are growing in power, and they don't have religious freedom. They don't have freedom of the press. They don't have elections. Their people are not free. And so we have to realize that they don't share our worldview. And if they influence the world affairs, it will not be a safer world. It'll be a more savage world that will be going down.
So your first of all path here is to do what to counter it?
For China?
For China, actually, I believe that China and Russia is like levels are different, but the threat is about the same. Well,
one of the good things that we see is, they're growing in power, military power, economic power. But one of the beauties of America is we have great allies. They do not. China has very few allies. Russia has very few allies. I mean, what can Russia say they have? Syria, right?
China.
I would say they're not very well aligned. There is some collaboration, but in the end, they don't really trust each other, frankly, because they're not about a higher good. Both countries there are about real politic of their power, right? And if their power comes at the expense of their neighbor's power. So I would say in the long run, there's not a very cohesive partnership there, but they both, share some similar authoritarian values. I'll just say it that way. So again, I would say our main goal is to ensure that we have a strong economy, a strong military, and work on our alliances, because America can't do it alone. The world can't do it without America. We have to have a coalition of free countries that share values, that are working together to defend our values and our sovereignty and our freedom.
Thanks a lot for the interview. I really hope you all the best during this not very simple period. Have a good weekends as well.
Yeah, Егор, thank you for a great interview. I appreciate your good questions, and you gave me a couple things to dig into. Thank you.